The crack of a bullwhip split the dusty air of Silver Creek as Tessa Orwell stumbled onto the auction block, her swollen belly a stark announcement of her condition to the crowd of jeering men. She clutched the frayed edges of her shawl tighter around her shoulders, terror etched across her face as the auctioneer yanked her forward by the rope binding her wrists. "What do I hear for this fine specimen?" the auctioneer bellowed, his voice carrying across the town square. "Comes with a bonus, the little one she's carrying. Makes for a ready-made family for any man looking to settle without the fuss of courting." Laughter erupted from the crowd, and Tessa's cheeks burned with humiliation. The year was 1878, and in the untamed territory of New Mexico, human dignity often came second to survival. 3 months widowed after her husband's death in a stagecoach robbery, she'd been left penniless, pregnant, and at the mercy of her late husband's creditors, who had decided to recoup their losses by selling her to the highest bidder. At the edge of the crowd, a tall figure leaned against the hitching post outside the saloon. Heath Hawkins observed the proceedings with cold eyes beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. Known throughout the territory as Heartless Hawkins, the rancher had earned a reputation for his ruthless business dealings and his apparent disdain for female company. "Look there," a voice muttered nearby. Even Hawkins came to watch. "Probably the only man in 3 counties who ain't interested in bidding. He hates women worse than rattlesnakes," another replied. "Ever since that Eastern girl jilted him and ran off with his fortune 5 years back, they say he ain't spoken more than 2 words to a woman since." Heath's jaw tightened as he caught the gossip, but his attention remained fixed on the auction block. The woman's red-rimmed eyes scanned the crowd desperately, looking for mercy where there was none to be found. Something about her quiet dignity in the face of such degradation stirred something within him, a feeling he'd thought long dead. $10, shouted a voice from the crowd. 15, called another. $25 for the woman and child. The bidding continued, mostly from miners and ranch hands looking for a domestic servant who could also warm their beds. $50. The crowd parted as Barton Wilkes, owner of the town's largest saloon, stepped forward. A collective hush fell over the gathering. Everyone knew what fate awaited the woman. If Wilkes won the bidding, she'd join the other unfortunate women who worked in the rooms above his establishment. Tessa's face drained of color as she recognized the saloon owner. Her hands instinctively moved to protect her unborn child. "Going once for 50. The auctioneer called, scanning the crowd. "Going twice, $500. The declaration fell like a thunderclap over the stunned crowd. All heads turned toward Heath Hawkins, who had pushed himself away from the hitching post and now stood with his hand raised, expression inscrutable beneath the shadow of his hat. "Did I hear you correctly, Mr. Hawkins?" the auctioneer asked, clearly stunned. "You heard me. $500. Heath's voice was steady, betraying no emotion. Wilkes sputtered in outrage. "Now see here, Hawkins, what business do you have? 600. Heath interrupted, staring directly at Wilkes. "If you want to keep bidding." Wilkes's face reddened with anger, but after a moment of calculation, he spat on the ground and stalked away. No woman was worth that much to him, especially not one in the family way. The auctioneer, recovering from his shock, quickly finalized the sale. "Sold to Mr. Heath Hawkins for $500. As the crowd dispersed, muttering and speculating about this unexpected turn of events, Heath approached the auction block. Tessa regarded him warily, having heard rumors about the man who apparently despised all womankind. "Sir," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know why you've done this, but I thank you." Heath didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached out and cut the rope binding her wrists with a quick flick of his knife. "Can you ride?" he asked abruptly. "Yes," she answered, rubbing her chafed wrists. "Then come with me." He turned and walked toward where his horse was tethered, not looking back to see if she followed. Tessa hesitated only a moment before hurrying after him. Whatever this man's intentions, they couldn't be worse than what awaited her with Wilkes. Heath helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her, careful to keep a respectful distance despite the intimacy of their position. They rode in silence out of town, the whispers and stares of the townspeople following them like shadows. "I've got a ranch about 10 miles outside of town," Heath finally said as Silver Creek disappeared behind them. "There's a small cabin on the property where the previous foreman lived. It's yours for as long as you need it." Tessa twisted slightly to look at him, confusion evident in her expression. "Why would you do this for a stranger, Mr. Hawkins, especially when everyone says—" She stopped herself, embarrassed. "When everyone says I hate women." Heath finished for her, a hint of bitterness in his tone. "Perhaps I do, but I hate injustice more." The sun was beginning its descent when they arrived at the Hawkins ranch. The main house stood on a gentle rise, a substantial 2-story structure built of sturdy logs and stone. Several outbuildings and corrals spread out below it, and beyond those, a smaller cabin sat near a stand of cottonwood trees. Heath's ranch hands paused in their work to stare as he rode in with Tessa. He ignored their curious glances as he helped her down from the horse in front of the small cabin. "Mabel," he called, and an older woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. "This is Miss Orwell. She'll be staying in the foreman's cabin. See that she has everything she needs." With that, he turned to leave, but Tessa caught his sleeve. "Mrs.," she corrected softly. "Mrs. Orwell. My husband died 3 months ago." Heath paused, his expression unreadable. "My condolences, Mrs. Orwell." Then he strode away toward the main house, leaving Tessa in Mabel's capable hands. Mabel clucked sympathetically as she took in Tessa's condition and bedraggled appearance. "Come along, dear. Let's get you settled. I'm Mabel Wilson, the housekeeper. Don't mind Mr. Hawkins, his bark is worse than his bite." Over the next few days, Tessa gradually recovered from her ordeal. The cabin, though small, was clean and comfortable, with a bedroom, a kitchen with a cookstove, and a sitting area. Mabel brought her food, clothing, and other necessities, explaining that Heath had instructed her to provide whatever Tessa required. Has he always been so? Tessa searched for the right word. Distant? Mabel sighed as she helped Tessa organize the small pantry. Not always. When I first came to work here 7 years ago, he was different, more open, full of plans for the future. Then Miss Alina Prescott arrived from Boston. "The woman who jilted him?" Tessa asked, remembering the gossip she'd overheard in town. Mabel nodded. "She was visiting relatives in Santa Fe. Heath met her at a social and was completely smitten. He courted her properly, and they were engaged within months. He even began building the east wing of the house for her, with a proper parlor and music room like she was accustomed to back east." "What happened?" She waited until he'd transferred a substantial sum to her name, supposedly for furnishings and her trousseau. "The next morning she was gone, along with most of his savings. Left a note saying she could never be happy in such an uncivilized place." Mabel shook her head. "After that, he just closed himself off. Threw himself into building the ranch, avoided social gatherings, especially where ladies were present." Tessa thought about this as she rested that afternoon. The man who had rescued her certainly seemed cold, but there had been momentary glimpses of something else beneath the hardened exterior, something that hinted at a capacity for compassion he tried to deny. A week passed, then 2. Tessa rarely saw Heath, who seemed to deliberately avoid the part of the property where her cabin stood. She occupied herself with making the cabin homey, taking short walks when her condition permitted, and occasionally helping Mabel with light duties in the main house when Heath was out working the range. One evening, a sudden summer storm blew in from the mountains. Lightning split the sky, followed by deafening thunder that shook the small cabin. As rain pounded against the roof, Tessa noticed water beginning to seep under the door. She grabbed towels to stem the flow, but soon realized the entire cabin floor was becoming flooded as water poured down the slope toward the structure. A particularly violent crack of thunder startled her, and she slipped on the wet floor, falling heavily against the table. Pain shot through her side and she gasped, clutching her belly protectively. Panic rose in her throat as another spasm gripped her too early. It was too early for the baby to come. The cabin door burst open and Heath stood there, rain dripping from his hat and coat. "The creek's overflowed," he said urgently. "This whole area could flood. You need to." He stopped short when he saw her doubled over in pain. "What's wrong?" "The baby," Tessa managed through gritted teeth. "Something's not right." Without hesitation, Heath crossed the room and scooped her into his arms. "Hold on to me," he instructed as he carried her out into the storm, shielding her as best he could with his coat. By the time they reached the main house, Tessa was barely conscious from the pain. Heath shouted for Mabel as he carried Tessa upstairs to a bedroom, gently laying her on the bed. "Get Dr. Simmons from town," he ordered one of the ranch hands who had appeared in the doorway. "Ride as fast as you can." Mabel hurried in with towels and hot water. "The doctor might not make it through the storm, Mr. Hawkins. Then we'll have to manage ourselves," Heath said grimly, rolling up his sleeves. "My mother was a midwife. I've assisted with births before." Through the long hours that followed, Heath never left Tessa's side. When she cried out in pain, he held her hand and spoke words of encouragement. When she feared she couldn't continue, he reminded her of her strength. And when dawn finally broke and her son entered the world with a lusty cry, it was Heath who placed the swaddled infant in her arms. His usually stern face softened with wonder. "He's perfect," Tessa whispered, tears streaming down her face as she counted tiny fingers and toes. "As is his mother," Heath replied softly, then seemed startled by his own words. He quickly busied himself with clearing away the birthing linens, his back turned to hide whatever emotion had momentarily overcome him. Dr. Simmons arrived later that morning, having been delayed by washed-out roads. After examining both mother and child, he declared them remarkably well, considering the circumstances. "You're a fortunate woman, Mrs. Orwell," the doctor said. "Premature births can be risky, but your son appears healthy, and you had quite the capable assistant." He nodded toward Heath, who stood awkwardly by the window. Not many men would know what to do in such a situation. "I was merely doing what was necessary," Heath said stiffly, uncomfortable with the praise. "Well, both mother and child should rest for at least 2 weeks before attempting to return to the cabin," the doctor advised as he packed his bag. "Though given the flooding, that structure may need substantial repairs anyway." After the doctor left, Heath cleared his throat. "You'll stay here in the main house until you're fully recovered," he said, making it sound more like an order than an offer. "Mabel will help with the baby." "Thank you," Tessa said, cradling her sleeping son, "for everything. I've decided to name him Henry after my father." A ghost of a smile touched Heath's lips. "Henry, a good, strong name." He moved toward the door, then paused. "If you need anything, just call for Mabel." "Or you?" Tessa asked softly. Heath stood frozen for a moment, then gave a single nod before leaving the room. In the days that followed, a subtle change came over the ranch. The stern, taciturn rancher who had avoided the main house whenever possible now found reasons to be there, particularly during mealtimes or in the evenings when Tessa would bring little Henry downstairs. Though he maintained a careful distance, his eyes frequently sought out the mother and child, watching with an expression that grew increasingly unguarded. One evening, about 2 weeks after Henry's birth, Tessa sat on the front porch in a rocking chair, humming softly to her son as the setting sun painted the landscape in hues of gold and crimson. She heard Heath's footsteps before she saw him, recognizing the measured cadence of his walk. "May I join you?" he asked, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "Please do," she replied, gesturing to the bench beside her. Heath sat, removing his hat and setting it beside him. For several minutes they simply existed in companionable silence, watching the sunset. "The cabin sustained significant damage in the flood," Heath finally said. "It will take some time to repair." "I see," Tessa responded, uncertain what this meant for her future. I was thinking, Heath continued, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains, that perhaps it doesn't make sense for you to return there at all. Tessa's heart sank. Are you asking me to leave the ranch? No, Heath said quickly, turning to face her. Quite the opposite, in fact. He took a deep breath as if steeling himself. I've grown accustomed to having you and Henry here. The house feels different, less empty. Tessa watched him struggle with words, this man who had spent years building walls around himself. Are you offering me a position as a housekeeper, perhaps? Heath frowned slightly. No, that's not what I meant. He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. I'm not good at this sort of thing, Mrs. Orwell. Please call me Tessa, she said softly. Tessa, he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name. I don't know what happened to your husband, and I understand if it's too soon to consider other arrangements. But I want you to know that you and Henry have a place here for as long as you wish, and perhaps in time we might consider a more permanent arrangement. Tessa's eyes widened as she realized what he was suggesting. Mr. Hawkins, Heath, he corrected. If I'm to call you Tessa, then you must call me Heath. She smiled at that. Heath, are you proposing an eventual courtship? I suppose I am, he admitted, a hint of vulnerability in his expression. I've spent 5 years believing I was better off alone, that caring for someone would only lead to pain. Then you arrived and something began to change. Watching you with Henry, seeing your strength and grace despite everything you've endured. It awakened feelings I thought were long dead. Henry stirred in Tessa's arms, and Heath reached out hesitantly, his large finger gently stroking the baby's cheek. The infant grasped his finger reflexively, and Heath's face transformed with a genuine smile that took years off his appearance. I know people in town say I hate women, he said, still captivated by the tiny hand gripping his finger. Perhaps for a time I did, or at least I tried to. But hatred is exhausting, Tessa. And somehow, without intending to, I've found myself caring for you both more than I thought possible. Tears welled in Tessa's eyes. When my husband died, I thought my life was over. Then when his creditors seized everything and put me up for auction, I was certain I had no future worth living. But you saved us, Heath. You gave us shelter and safety when we needed it most. And you, Heath said softly, reminded me that there is more to life than bitterness and solitude. As summer gave way to autumn, Heath and Tessa's relationship blossomed slowly, like a desert flower after rain. They began taking meals together, with Henry nestled in a cradle nearby. In the evenings, Heath would read aloud from books in his study while Tessa sewed or mended. On Sundays, they rode together to church in town, causing a stir among the locals who had never expected to see heartless Hawkins escorting a woman and child. Did you see how they stared at us? Tessa asked one Sunday as they drove home in the buggy, Henry sleeping contentedly in her lap. Heath's lips quirked into what had become an increasingly familiar smile. Let them stare. Their gossip matters little to me now. By winter, Tessa had fully taken on the role of mistress of the Hawkins ranch. She managed the household affairs, worked alongside Mabel in planning meals for the ranch hands, and even helped Heath with the bookkeeping, discovering she had a talent for numbers that her late husband had never encouraged her to use. The first snow of the season arrived in early December, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Heath found Tessa in the parlor that evening, standing by the window watching the snowflakes drift down in the glow of the porch lantern. It's beautiful, she said as he joined her. Henry's first snow. Heath nodded, then cleared his throat nervously. I have something to show you if you'll come with me. Curious, Tessa followed him upstairs to the east wing of the house, the section she knew he had originally built for his former fiancée. He hesitated outside a closed door, then pushed it open. Tessa gasped. The room, which had been empty and dusty the few times she'd glimpsed it before, had been transformed into a nursery. A handcrafted wooden crib stood in the center, surrounded by a rocking chair, a small bookshelf filled with children's books, and a chest that, when opened, revealed an assortment of carved wooden toys. Heath, she breathed, turning to him with tears in her eyes. When did you do all this? "I've been working on it in the evenings when you thought I was in the study," he admitted. "The ranch hands helped with some of it. Do you like it?" "It's perfect," she said, running her hand along the smooth rail of the crib. "But why now? Henry still sleeps in my room." Heath took her hands in his expression more open and vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "Because I wanted to show you that I'm ready, Tessa. Ready to be a father to Henry and a husband to you if you'll have me." Tessa's heart soared. Over the past months, she had come to love this complex man who had saved her from a terrible fate. She had watched him transform from a bitter recluse into a caring, gentle soul who sang lullabies to her son and brought her wildflowers from the range. "Are you certain?" she asked softly. "I know how deeply you were hurt before." "Eleanor took my money and my trust," Heath said, stroking Tessa's cheek tenderly. "But you and Henry have given me back something far more valuable: my capacity to love. I was afraid to admit it at first, even to myself. That day at the auction, something compelled me to act, though I told myself it was merely justice that motivated me. But it was more than that, Tessa. Something in me recognized something in you, a kindred spirit who had been wounded by life but refused to be broken by it." Tessa stepped closer to him, her eyes never leaving his. "My late husband married me for my family connections, not for love. When those connections failed to yield the financial advantages he expected, he grew resentful. I've never known what it is to be truly cherished." "Then let me show you," Heath whispered, drawing her into his arms. "Let me spend the rest of my life showing you and Henry how deeply you are loved." Their first kiss was gentle, a tender promise of the future they would build together. When they finally parted, Tessa rested her head against Heath's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Yes," she said simply, "I will marry you, Heath Hawkins." They were married on Christmas Day in the parlor of the ranch house with Mabel, Dr. Simmons, and the ranch hands as witnesses. Henry, now nearly 6 months old and growing stronger every day, watched the proceedings from Mabel's arms, occasionally babbling happily as if giving his approval. As winter yielded to spring, the Hawkins ranch flourished along with its inhabitants. Heath expanded his cattle operation, with Tessa proving to be an adept business partner as well as a loving wife. The East Wing, once a painful reminder of betrayal, became filled with the sounds of family life: Henry's first steps, his first words, and later the patter of his siblings' feet as the family grew. The town of Silver Creek gradually revised its opinion of Heath Hawkins. No longer was he heartless Hawkins who hated women, but rather a respected rancher with a beautiful family and a generous spirit. Few remembered the day he had appeared at the auction block to save a desperate pregnant widow, but Heath and Tessa never forgot. On the 5th anniversary of that fateful day, Heath took Tessa riding to a beautiful overlook on their property. Henry, now an energetic 5-year-old, rode his own pony alongside them, while their 3-year-old twins, a boy and girl, stayed behind with Mabel. As they reached the summit, Heath helped Tessa down from her horse and led her to a spot where they could see the entire ranch spread below them: the main house with its thriving East Wing, the barns and corrals, the orchards Tessa had planted, and the pastures dotted with healthy cattle. "I brought you here because I wanted you to see what you've helped create," Heath said, his arm around her waist. 5 years ago I owned this land, but it wasn't a home. It was just a place where I existed, nursing my bitterness." Tessa leaned against him, watching Henry chase butterflies nearby. "And now it's everything I never dared to dream of," Heath said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "A true home filled with love and laughter and life. We built it together," Tessa reminded him. "Both of us broken in our own ways, but stronger where we mended." Heath turned her to face him, his eyes reflecting the same love and devotion they had shown on their wedding day. "Everyone said I hated women," he murmured, "but they were wrong. I was simply waiting for the right woman to remind me how to love." As the sun began its descent, painting the landscape in the same golden hues as the day they had first sat together on the porch, Heath and Tessa Hawkins gathered their son and rode home not to a small flood-damaged cabin or a half-empty house haunted by past betrayals, but to the warm, vibrant home they had created together, a testament to the healing power of love that had begun with an unexpected act of mercy on an auction block in Silver Creek.